Years ago now, a few mates and me had managed to secure an invite to a Halloween house party. We didn't really know anyone else there, having only secured the invite because one of us worked with a girl whose student house it was. But since it was literally the only house party we could actually get into, we weren't arguing. A big thing about house parties is, the older you get, the harder it is to find a good one. Most people make their big house party mistake earlier in life and vow never ever to have one again. So the idea of one big hurrah before we started on that late 20s, early 30s quiet drinks bollocks was wildly appealing. We agreed to meet up in my flat for some pre-drinks and get changed into our various costumes. Fancy dress was a must, according to our mate's colleague. You have never seen such awful Halloween costumes in all your life. One lad just bought a wig and badly applied his mum's makeup, claiming to be Frankenfurter from Rocky Horror Picture Show. But without having the stones to rent the suspenders and corset, he just looked like he was in the middle of a bad sex change. Another fella just threw on some old army cadet gear so he could be a soldier or whatever. But it had been a good couple of years since he'd last put it on, and he was considerably wider around the waist. So what I suppose was meant to be intimidating just ended up looking completely ridiculous. The winner, without a doubt, was our mate Danny, who'd actually pulled off a pretty convincing Michael Myers costume. So for those that don't know, the mask used in the film Halloween is actually a Captain Kirk Star Trek mask that the prop guys roughed up a little. Yep, one of the most iconic images in horror comes from a crummy piece of sci-fi merch. Crazy, right? Anyway, Danny had actually managed to get his hands on a replica of said mask from his older brother, who was and is something of a horror freak. Then all he had to do was borrow a set of his dad's old mechanic overalls, get hold of a plastic butcher's knife, and he actually looked the real deal. So after we filled our bellies full of cheap supermarket lager, we make a move for the house party. The place the party was at was only like 5 to 10 minute walk from my flat, so we decided to walk around to soak up a bit of the Halloween atmosphere. I don't know what I was expecting. Maybe a few rooms full of people chatting away with a bit of music playing meekly in a back room. But the closer we got to the right street, the more we could hear this thumping bass sound drifting through the air. Imagine if that was the party we're going to, one of us joked. But it was the party. We're in the middle of this actual residential area. All of the other houses are settled in for the night, and there's this one house with its door wide open, people in costume wandering in and out. These colored lights, a smoke machine, even an actual bloody DJ set up in a bedroom with speakers all through the house. Enjoy it while it lasts, boys. I can guarantee you the police are on their way, right now, one of us said. Laughing, we piled into the house and started mingling with complete strangers. I won't deny it. They might have been posh kids from down south, but they knew how to throw a party. They actually laughed at us when they realized we'd brought our own beer, the host taking us into the back garden to show us these buckets full of beer and ice water. We were welcome to drink as much as we liked. In exchange, we put our room temperature cans into their fridge as a kind of communal offering. Yeah, we met a few snobs sneering with the "who invited you" look in our direction, but mostly people were lovely, especially when they found out we brought a special kind of tobacco with us. We drank long into the night somehow. The police didn't actually turn up for the first few hours. They must have been busy with the other more criminal stuff, but eventually turn up they did. But honestly, it was all part of the experience. It's not a true house party unless the busybodies show up. They were actually pretty cool about the whole thing, too. They didn't shout. They didn't stop, search, or arrest anyone. They just told us there had been a noise complaint and we had to clear out if we didn't leave there. They even laughed when someone in the crowd anonymously shouted, "Are you the male strippers we hired?" And this is where the story gets weird. So, throughout the party, our mate Danny had been kind of in character, walking silently and scarily into rooms, moving his head all slow as he looked around, just like Michael Myers. He'd then break into some weird dance and have people laughing, but it's important to know that he seemed to be enjoying playing the part. Anyway, we all managed to find each other in the throngs of people outside, despite being absolutely smashed. Only, we're not exactly ready to call it a night. So we decide to walk quite a bit of our way to visit the 24-hour off license to buy more booze. So, the whole way, Danny doesn't say a word. It might be worth mentioning that he isn't the most talkative when he's sober, so when he's angry, he pretty much says nothing at all. Just does his signature wheeze laugh when anything amusing happens. So just as we're outside the off-license, queuing by the little hatch to get served, I noticed something unusual about Danny's toy butcher knife. I swear he had a fake one at the start of the night, but right then I noticed the knife in his hand is bloody real. Before the fellow in the offie notices and calls the police thinking it's real, I slowly take the knife out of his hand, having a sort of mini freak-out that the bellend would be daft enough to steal a real knife from the house party. Right then, like something out of a movie, my phone starts going in my pocket. I pull it out and on the screen is the name, Danny. Now, I'm still bladdered at this point, so my first thought is that Danny lost his phone or something, and someone is calling my number, the last person he'd call, to let them know where to safely find it. So I answer with something like, "Yeah, I know. My mate's an idiot. I hope he's not stolen anything else." But the voice on the other end is Danny. Definitely Danny asking where we've gone. He passed out in the bathroom of that student's house and had only just been kicked out of. Cue an actual bloody freakout as I point the knife at this total bloody stranger and demand to know who they are. It all hits me at once. The guy had gloves on. Danny didn't. The strange guy had actual boots on. Danny just had black trainers. My mates have no idea what's going on. As far as they know, I'm on the verge of ending one of our closest mates' lives. But when they too realize what's going on, they too start freaking out on the fella, asking him what he was planning on doing with that knife, following us halfway around town like a proper creep. The lad ended up laying it down the street as we chased him. I've no idea what we were going to do, but we were angry and scared. So I'm sort of glad we didn't catch up to him. Halloween used to be my favorite time of the year. I was kind of a horror freak. I loved horror novels, movies, and games. I spent hours absorbing all the YouTube creepypasta stories I could find. But that all changed one Halloween night when myself and a few friends found something that would change our lives forever. This is the story of the Dead House. I always did love that era of chaos that presents on Halloween night. That twisted, festive feeling that adds a spark of excitement to an otherwise dark and dreary time of the year. We were too old to be trick-or-treating, but we still wanted to wander the streets and soak up the atmosphere. Besides, there's a lot you can get away with in costume, especially when you pour your bottle of adult beverage into a Mountain Dew bottle and label it Spooky Juice. Our buddy Spike had comprehensively won our internal costume contest with his own homemade proton pack and Ghostbusters jumpsuit. He'd spent weeks on it, watching little YouTube painting tutorials and binge-watching the movies for minor details. It looked amazing, and he wasn't about to miss out on the opportunity to show the thing off. So off we went, wandering around the neighborhood and eating store-bought candy. Since we were way too old to be trick-or-treating, part of the fun of these Halloween walkabouts was seeing the spectacular ways that fellow Halloween enthusiasts had decorated their houses. Over the years, it became something of a competition, and each year the decorations became more and more elaborate. I remember one family had gone as far as digging a small pit in their front lawn. They put some red lights in there, then covered the thing over with wooden boards that were complete with fake zombie fingers reaching out between the slats. It looked amazing, and we found ourselves joining a gaggle of parents and taking selfies with the chillingly original decoration. We saw some pretty impressive stuff that evening, from fake bodies hanging from trees to chained-up dogs that had been dressed up as adorable little hounds. but nothing caught our attention like the house at the end of Bachman Street. So a lot of you have heard of these hell houses that crop up around Halloween every year. The most infamous being these guerrilla operations where people can make a few bucks while indulging in a little of the Halloween spirit. So when you saw the house at the end of Bachman Street with its doors wide open, we figured it was just part of the display. A couple was heading away from the house looking pretty scared, so we asked them what the deal was with the front door being left open. "Oh man, they really went all out this year," one of the pair said. "It's so realistic in there. We left a few dollars on the table as a thank you. There's no tip jar anywhere, so you guys gotta see it though." On that, we agreed. Something that was actually scary, right here in our own neighborhood? We had to see it. We studied the house intently as we wandered down the street towards it. The facade was barely decorated compared to the others we'd seen. Just a carved pumpkin and a few plastic hanging skeletons were all we could see on approach. But there was something odd about the way the cars were parked in the driveway, something weirdly chaotic. Anyway, we wander up to the front door, peering inside before entering. But again, there doesn't seem to be any extensive decoration on the inside either. That all changes once we enter the kitchen. One of the dining chairs was dripping with gore. Ropes around the armrests hanging freely as they'd been cut away from someone's arms. Laid on the table nearby were all kinds of bloody kitchen utensils, some still clogged with shredded flesh. Flies buzzed around us, landing on the body and various bloodstains around the room. "Wow," one of us said softly. "You can see where they use corn syrup to make the blood. Houseflies love that stuff." "Then how did they get that kind of stink up in there?" another asked. But we didn't put too much thought into it. We were so overwhelmed and impressed that we just carried on moving through the house. The living room was somehow even more disturbing than the kitchen. Sat on a small, dark wood coffee table was a kind of homemade doll. It was a cluster of roots and twigs, all bound and woven together with reeds and dry grass. The face of the thing was made of clay, a single shiny stone pushed into it, resembling a kind of cyclopean eye. Arranged around it in a perfect circle were severed fingers, toes, and plucked out eyes. There was also a cluster of dollar bills from the couple's recent visit. I took out my wallet, taking out a few old singles before asking around to see if my buddies had anything to leave as a kind of thank you. There must have been about $14 in ones and twos in my hand by the time I let it drop onto the coffee table. "Oh, come on, let's see the upstairs, then get out of here. This place is giving me the creeps," I said. My buddies wouldn't let me hear the end of it. Scared by a family-run hell house, what an idiot. But when we saw the kids' bedroom, they were scared too. Inside, sitting among a carpet of stuffies and kids' toys, was a man. At first, all we could see was the back of him. He had long, thin gray hair and had somehow fit himself into a little girl's pink, frilly nightgown. We all froze in the doorway, staring wide-eyed as the creepy-looking old guy just sat there, playing with the toys, putting on little childish voices as he played at making them talk to one another. It was one of the most disturbing things I'd ever seen in my entire life. Whoever had thought that character up must have had one seriously disturbed imagination. The man turned still as a statue for a moment, sensing our presence behind him. When we turned, we saw his milky white eyes and blackening teeth, and ran for the door. We weren't exactly terrified, but we were still spooked and laughing nervously to ourselves as we bounded back into the street outside. But as we began to walk back out of the cul-de-sac road, blue and red lights began to flash before our eyes. It was the cops, screaming down past us down the street before rushing into the house we'd just left. There was nothing remotely fake about that house. The old man was an escaped psychiatric patient who had lived in the house as a child. The newspapers said he busted out of the institution he was being held in before he walked 30 miles into town back to his childhood home. He must have thought the people living there were intruders, At knife point, he tied them up and tortured them till he finished them. We never found out what happened to the kids inside the house, and quite frankly, I'm not sure I could handle it. Timothy O'Brien lived with his family in Deer Park, Texas, with his parents and little sister. His father, Ronald O'Brien, worked as an optician at Texas State Optical in Sharpston, Houston. He was the deacon at the Second Baptist Church, where he also sang in the choir. He was a trusted member of the community, being placed in charge of the local bus program. On Halloween night of 1974, O'Brien took Timothy and his sister trick-or-treating in a Pasadena, Texas neighborhood, along with his neighbor and their 2 children. When the group knocked at a house but the occupants failed to answer, the children grew frustrated and skipped ahead to the next home in search of candy. When O'Brien caught up with them, they showed him 5 21-inch pixie sticks they had been given. When they returned home later in the evening, the young Timothy asked if he could eat one of the candy he and his friends had collected, opting for the huge pixie sticks he had prized so dearly. The young boy had trouble getting the powdered candy out of the plastic straw that contained it, so his father helped him loosen the sugary powder before offering it to him. When he ate it, Timothy remarked that the candy had a bitter flavor, so his father fetched him a glass of Kool-Aid to wash away the unpleasant taste. But this was followed by Timothy complaining that his stomach hurt. Ronald took his son to the bathroom, where he immediately began to violently vomit. But the discomfort did not ease, and soon the young boy was shaking and convulsing after collapsing to the bathroom floor. Ronald held his son close, but he soon went limp in his arms. Timothy O'Brien died on his way to a nearby hospital, just less than an hour after consuming the candy. Timothy's autopsy revealed that the pixie stick he consumed was laced with a fatal dose of potassium cyanide. There was enough cyanide in his system to kill 3 to 4 fully grown adults. Timothy's death from the apparent poisoned Halloween candy prompted intense fear and paranoia in the local community. Numerous parents in Deer Park and the surrounding area promptly returned all of the candy their children acquired from trick-or-treating to the police, for fear it was laced with the same deadly poison. During police interviews, Ronald O'Brien claimed that he could not remember exactly which house gave the children the pixie stick. However, the group of adults and children had only visited 2 streets worth of homes due to heavy rain that had begun to fall that evening. This narrowed down the search considerably. Houses were searched, recent receipts seized as evidence. Yet suspicions were raised when it was discovered that none of the homes the group visited were giving out pixie sticks. Police accompanied Ronald O'Brien through the neighborhood and questioned several times. Each time, he led them to the home that the group had visited, but those occupants did not answer the door. There, Ronald claimed that he had in fact revisited the house before he caught up with the children. He claimed that the owner had cracked the door open, that he inside of the house was dark, and a hairy, scarred arm reached out and handed him all 5 of the 21-inch pixie sticks. Police discovered the homeowner in question was a man by the name of Courtney Melvin. Melvin was employed as an air traffic controller at nearby Hobby Airport and asserted under questioning that he did not get home from work until 11 p.m. on the night of the 31st. When nearly 200 witnesses confirmed this, Courtney Melvin was rolled out as a potential suspect. But as their investigation continued, police made a shocking discovery that turned all theories upside down. It was learned that Ronald O'Brien was actually more than $100,000 in debt after a history of being unable to hold down a steady-paying job. In the 10 years previous to the death of his son, Ronald had held a grand total of 21 jobs. During interviews with his current employers, police were told by Ronald's bosses that he was suspected of workplace theft from Texas State Optical and was dangerously close to being fired. His car was on the verge of being repossessed. He had defaulted on several bank loans, which had in turn led to the family home being foreclosed on. Although he presented himself as the clean-cut pastor, Ronald's life was a mess of lies and deceit. It was discovered that Ronald O'Brien had taken out life insurance policies on his children in the months preceding the poisoning. One $10,000 policy with two additional $20,000 policies on both children. This was in spite of the advice given by the insurance agencies not to do so. When asked, Deneen O'Brien, the mother of Timothy and Ronald's wife, claimed she was completely unaware of any insurance policies on her children's lives. The final clue came when police learned that Ronald O'Brien had stopped by a chemical supply store in Houston and asked to purchase cyanide. However, he left empty-handed when he learned the smallest amount purchasable was 5 pounds. Despite repeatedly protesting his own innocence, O'Brien was now a major suspect. Texas police never did find out just where or when Ronald O'Brien had bought the cyanide that he used on his son. But regardless, on November 5, 1974, he was arrested for Timothy's murder. Ronald was charged with 1 count of capital murder and 4 counts of attempted murder, given that the other children were in extreme danger of consuming the poison intended for Timothy. He entered a plea of not guilty to all 5 counts. During the trial, a chemist who was familiar with O'Brien claimed that he had contacted him the previous summer regarding lethal dosages of cyanide. Another chemist took the stand testifying that Ronald had asked him how he could go about purchasing the deadly chemical. Additionally, Ronald's friends and coworkers also said that in the months preceding Timothy's death, Ronald had shown an unusual interest in cyanide and spoke about how much it would take to end a person's life. Those that attended Timothy's funeral told the court how Ronald had casually talked of taking a long vacation, only possible through the money accrued from Timothy's life insurance policies. O'Brien continued to maintain his innocence throughout the trial. Bizarrely, his defense hinged on the decades-old urban legend of the Mad Poisoner, who was purported to hand out Halloween candy laced with needles, broken glass, razor blades, or poison. Despite absolutely no documentation of such malice, these stories have persisted among those with a rich imagination. On June 3, 1975, a jury took just 46 minutes to find O'Brien guilty of capital murder. The jury then took just over an hour to sentence him to death. Shortly after he was convicted, his wife filed for divorce. She later remarried, and her new husband adopted their surviving daughter, Elizabeth. The case and subsequent trial garnered national attention, and the press gave Ronald O'Brien a nickname I'm sure you'll all be familiar with: the Candyman. In the early afternoon of Halloween 2010, Ohio resident Devin Griffin was returning home after a brisk Sunday morning of singing in his local church's choir. He never missed a Sunday service, and this All Hallows Eve would be no exception. After walking through the front door of his family home, the 16-year-old trudged up to his bedroom to relax and play video games. It was something of a routine for him. Getting up early on a Sunday meant a guilt-free afternoon of online gaming with his friends. After a few hours of gaming, Devin took a quick break to grab a snack, but began to notice something unusual about the household. It was just past 1:30 in the afternoon when Devin started to wonder where his family was. His mother, Susan Lisk, worked night shifts, so it wasn't entirely unusual for her to sleep late into the morning. But never did she stay in bed until the early afternoon. Out of curiosity, Devin wandered downstairs from his attic room and knocked on the door of the family's home's master bedroom. There was no answer, but that didn't stop him. Devin opened the door to see his mother lying in bed next to his stepfather, William Lisk Sr. A maroon comforter was pulled over their heads. In a soft voice, Devin began to ask if they were planning on getting out of bed anytime soon. Again, there was no response. He walked around to her side of the bed and saw his mother's foot jutting out from underneath the goose-down duvet. He tapped on it. Again, no response. As Devin continued to talk, he instinctually pulled down the covers a little. It was her pillow. It was soaked with blood. For a moment or two, Devon could not compute what he was seeing. He later told detectives that he thought it was just some Halloween prank, albeit one done in extremely bad taste. But as he continued to look, he saw the large wound in her neck, dark clots of blood forming around it. Devon ran screaming from the house, frantically begging neighbors to summon emergency medical services. Upon his arrival, Ottawa County Sheriff Bob Bratton said 53-year-old William Lisk, his 46-year-old wife Susan Lisk, as well as her 23-year-old son Derek Griffin, were all found murdered. A preliminary coroner's exam had indicated that their deaths were caused either by gunshot or a blunt object. A suspect identified as 24-year-old William Lisk Jr., thought to be the son of the murdered father from his previous marriage, was arrested almost 200 miles away and was initially charged with only one count of murder in the first degree. After receiving a tip that the suspect killer would be hiding out in a log cabin owned by a distant family member, Deputy Michael Balash was ordered to pay the cabin a visit. Upon his arrival, the deputy spotted a white Ford pickup truck, matching the description given of the vehicle Lisk Jr. would be driving. When he approached the man's residence, it's reported that after Lisk Jr. casually walked out of the brown single-story cabin, still smoking a cigarette as he leaned against a porch post. Deputy Balash then pulled in with gun drawn, took Lisk to the ground and held him at gunpoint until backup arrived to assist with handcuffing the suspect. Carroll County Sheriff Dale Williams said that evidence was found on the suspect that also indicated that he was guilty of killing his stepmother and stepbrother. But to those that knew William Lisk Jr., the murders hardly came as a surprise. As early as 2002, his father Bill had called law enforcement on more than one occasion because the then 16-year-old had threatened to harm himself. The boy was on house arrest at the time for other offenses. According to police records, Lisk Jr. proceeded to attack the responding officers when they arrived, and later faced charges in juvenile court of assault on a peaceful officer. Then, in October 2004, Lisk Jr. got into a violent altercation with his stepmother and struck her hard into the chest. 2 months later, police charged him with felonious assault and robbery for allegedly hitting his stepmother Susan with a coffee cup before stealing her car keys. He was found incompetent to stand trial on those charges, which were eventually dropped. Lisk Jr. had at least 3 more encounters with the police after he moved to a group home for mental health patients. Among those incidents was a physical fight between Lisk Jr. and his father after Bill Lisk drove to the group home to pick him up. In the immediate aftermath, police struggled to establish a clear motive for the killings. It was clear from the records that Lisk Jr. had repeated run-ins with law enforcement that included jail time and mental health treatment. But what exactly drove the young man to commit such an act of senseless cruelty and malice to his own parents? In the course of the investigation, it came to light that Susan Lisk had filed a police report against her stepson, claiming that he had assaulted her. The report was filed less than a month before her murder. It is entirely possible that this had been the final straw for Lisk Jr.'s father. His past behavior and drug use had been antisocial to say the least, but William Sr. had fought time and time again to prevent his son becoming trapped in a cycle of addiction and incarceration. However, to assault his own stepmother was without a doubt a bridge too far. In court, Lisk Jr. admitted he was guilty of all 3 counts of murder in the first degree. A judge then quickly sentenced him to serve 3 life sentences with no chance of parole. Without shedding a tear, Lisk told a courtroom filled with those who knew and loved his father, stepmother, and stepbrother that he could not explain why he brutally murdered them on that fateful Halloween. "I love my dad very much, and it makes me feel sick every time I think about what I did," Lisk said. "I can't really explain why this all had to happen, but I think most of all of it had to do with my mental illness." Lisk Jr.'s defense attorney said it was ridiculous that his client could be declared legally sane, especially when he had a history of poor mental health. He said it's unknown whether Lisk was taking the medication that was prescribed for his schizoaffective disorder on the night of the murders, although he had been drinking alcohol. Clearly, he should have not been provided alcohol, something that was a constant problem in his life. The mixture of alcohol and his mental illness. Lisk Jr.'s sister, Lisa Curl, told the court that her family's lives had been changed forever. "We just don't understand how something like this could happen. You see stuff like this on TV and think it will never happen to your family. You love someone so much and then they take something away from you. I just don't know how you could do it when he loved you so much." On March 31st of 2015, William Lisk Jr. was found dead in his cell at Ross Correctional Institution in Chillicothe, Ohio, from a self-inflicted injury. He was 29 years old. Back in high school, just after the start of my junior year, me and some buddies got the Halloween spirit pretty heavy. We were obsessed with metal and horror movies. They were all we talked about. So throughout the month of October, we got into visiting creepy places and holding these do-it-yourself parties. Literally a group of about 30 of us would carpool to some abandoned house one weekend or to some secluded forest the next, spending the days at school in between searching for more places like this in the area. Anyhow, given that we weren't necessarily believers in the supernatural, we had this cavalier nature about us when it came to potential hauntings. At some point, a friend of mine was several years older than me told me about how he and his friends would do similar things when they were young. His childhood home backed up to a huge farm, and he and his friends would spend their days fishing or hanging out on this farm, so they were quite familiar with it. The owner, apparently a very religious man, a priest or pastor maybe, had owned the farm and a small house on the property. The story went that the owner had been locked up for murder and died in prison, leaving the farm to whomever, and it wasn't kept up. However, upon hearing the news of this man's demise, my friend told me that he and his friends had decided to go into this house. I guess the windows had been busted out as they managed to unlock a door and just walk in. He described them fooling around and trying to scare one another, but he had decided to walk up the stairs, and upon his reaching the second floor, he saw a coffin in the main open room. The way he had explained it to me was that he didn't know what it was immediately and sort of sauntered over to check it out, only to have the sudden flash of realization that this was an actual coffin in an abandoned house. I suppose he and his friends made a quick retreat from the house. Of course, he told this part of the story much better, peppering in more details about the man who owned the property that gave the story that mythical lore sort of feel. I remember being frightened by his delivery and sincerity, though it is quite likely he had rehearsed it before for occasions like this. This story had taken place 15 years or so previous to him telling me. I told one of my adventurous cohorts the story, and we thought it would be a good idea to investigate it, to see if the guy was actually telling the truth. So one Halloween, we packed his car, snacks and supplies, then set off to set the record straight. I knew where this person had lived, so we assumed we could simply walk behind his house, find the farm, then find the house. We had a grand plan to bring the whole group out on the weekend, but we weren't sure if we were being strung on a lie or if this place was still there, if it were true. Anyhow, after football practice one weekday, he and I drove out to the street my friend lived on. There was definitely a farm behind his and his entire street's homes. That part he had been telling the truth about. We decided to go ahead and sneak through someone's yard and onto the farm to see if the house was there. Once we made it through the manicured suburban yard and through the brush separating the farm, we were knee-deep in an overgrown field. We sort of hacked our way through a bit, and sure enough, as we made it to the edge of the hill, the house was only 100 or so yards away. We had made it that far, so we decided to go in and investigate. As we approached this house, there was a huge black bird perched on its roof. Once we were within 20 feet of the house, the bird flew away from the house and perched upon a tree adjacent to the house. Being a bit nervous, we began questioning why the bird had made such an odd move, but thought better of making a big deal about it. Now, this house is the prototypical haunted house. It had that quaint historical look to it, with the broken windows, eerie shadows, and sort of ominous stature one associates with a haunted house. There was even a grave marker in the front yard. So again, we were increasingly nervous as we approached this house. The door was jammed shut, but the window had been completely removed, so we played rock, paper, scissors for who would climb through first. I had the luxury of going in second, but did so quickly as being on the porch by myself was just as unsettling. The inside of the house had literally not been touched. Besides weather damage, most everything was intact. There were pictures and decorations still up, with a bit of furniture remaining. We eventually became comfortable with being inside and began to snoop around. Of course, we were fearful of trekking upstairs, afraid to find something we didn't want to find. Alas, we squeamishly crept up the stairs to find an empty space. At this point, we became at ease with walking around the house, laughing off the ghost story mystique. As we looked through the main floor again, I noticed that there was a tiny door in the kitchen. It was about knee-high. Undauntedly, we flung it open only to reveal a dark stone stairwell that a person would literally have to crawl down. Its presence alone was terrifying, for some reason, but it had a landing about halfway down, with the stairs turning a different direction and out of our sight. However, perched on the landing, and partly concealed by the walls to the other part of the stairwell, was a large, rectangular wooden box. A coffin. Now, my friend and I weren't exactly small people, so I would imagine the sight of us, pale-faced, with a cartoonish hair-on-neck shocked expression trying to both squeeze out of a window at the same time would have been quite comical. Not to mention the both of us in a dead sprint heading away from this house through waist-high weeds. I still laugh thinking about both of us running like that. Anyhow, we turned to look back about halfway to the end of the farm just in time to see that massive black bird fly back from the tree and onto the house. We probably made double time from that point on. In hindsight, the whole thing was a bit odd, most especially the behavior of the bird. My friend and I joked about it possessing some sort of supernatural power, but looking back, I think that was just to mask how scared we really were. Halloween is that certain time of year when we give ourselves over to ghosts, horror stories, and all kinds of macabre entertainment. But is it the case that such a spooky atmosphere pushes humans to express the darker side of their nature? Here's how 10 places in the United States deal with crime and antisocial behavior on the scariest day of the year. Police in the New York City borough of Queens, acting under the state's Operation Halloween Zero Tolerance program, check in on paroled offenders on Halloween, as well as the days before and after. As part of the surveillance program, those who have done acts convicted against children could have their homes checked to ensure that they don't have any X-rated material, which would violate the terms of their parole. Offenders are not allowed to wear any kind of masks or costumes. They're also forbidden to participate in any related Halloween activities and are prohibited from opening their doors to trick-or-treaters. There is certainly nothing more frightening than the thought of one of those men opening their door to innocent children. A state patrol source is quoted as saying, "There is also a curfew for all offenders from 3 p.m. in the afternoon of Halloween to 6 a.m. the following day. Offenders who don't follow these rules could have their parole revoked and be sent back to prison." The city of Orange in California employs similar measures to protect children. It passed an ordinance that offenders must post signs on their doors on Halloween to keep trick-or-treaters from knocking there. Police required these offenders to place a sign on the door at least 12 by 24 inches in size, reading, "No candy or treats at this residence." Repercussions for failing to do so included a possible $1,000 fine or a year in jail. Police officers in Orlando have reported that around Halloween every year, an uptick in crime occurs by criminals wearing Halloween masks. This has included 2 men with gorilla masks pistol whipping a man depositing money at a credit union, and 2 robbers wearing Halloween masks stabbing a man behind a restaurant. Of course, the decision to put on a Halloween mask or that scream disguise to commit a crime is not unique to Orlando alone, but wearing a mask could result in other consequences in the state. For example, in Florida, anyone committing a crime while wearing a mask can face ramped-up charges. As well, a Florida law prohibits anyone over the age of 16 from wearing a mask or hood in a public place or during a meeting except on Halloween. Yes, sad to say, this dates all the way back to the Klan and was enacted to prevent members from wearing hoods during their Klan marches. Perhaps even scarier is that this law has been used more than 200 times following its 1951 passage. It may seem curious that police in South Los Angeles say they see no spike in crime on Halloween, but that may be because they deploy extra units to help with the safety factor, as reports South Carolina Public Radio. However, by safety factor, they mean the tendency of trick-or-treaters to run out between moving or parked cars. However, a captain of another division, its 77th Street Division, did admit to concerns about Halloween spikes in crime. In fact, in 2011, that division had 34 incidences of crime on Halloween, 10 of those being burglaries. That captain told the radio station that that number was extraordinarily high. Georgetown in Washington, D.C. reported that incidences of burglary tend to be more common on Halloween or on Halloween weekends in Georgetown compared to other regular days and weekends of the year. That said, however, it is theft that has been the most prevalent crime to occur on Halloween in Georgetown, more than double the incidence of the next reported crime of robbery. And when it comes to crimes committed on Halloween weekends, the occurrence of theft becomes even greater, nearly 4 times as frequent as the second most reported crime of theft from autos. It seems that the spooky season makes people much more willing to commit petty crime in the nation's capital. A North Korea news outlet reported that crimes occurring on Halloween have remained steady since 2007, when a spat of larcenies from motor vehicles and stolen bicycles reported on the UNC Charlotte campus. Campus Police Lieutenant Josh Huffman remarked that the campus also does see a slight increase in vandalism and alcohol-related offenses on Halloween, but for the most part of the day is like any other in terms of crime on campus. However, it is also worth remembering a lesser-known law that exists in North Carolina, General Statute 1421.7, that prohibits anyone over the age of 16 from wearing a mask in public. Although crime occurring on Halloween dropped 8% from 2010 to 2011, theft, vandalism, and simple assault have remained the most frequently occurring crimes in Tempe, Arizona on Halloween. In fact, in 2011, theft accounted for 20.7% of crime in the city, according to the East Valley Tribune. In 2010, simple assault topped the list, accounting for 19.1% of all crimes. Of course, alcohol-related incidents are also common, particularly in the city's Mill Street area near the Arizona State University campus, and fights that occur at these can lead to charges such as simple assault. Halloween parties can generate a lot of different things. Lieutenant Jeffrey Glover of the Tempe Police Department said, "We have a lot of calls for service, so more officers are responding to calls at that time of hour. Also, you have the drinking that goes on. Sometimes people don't make the best decisions." Even though Halloween fell on a Saturday in 2009, it may be cold weather that prevented its crime numbers from reaching anything out of the ordinary for the holiday in Blacksburg. Since it was cold and rainy on Saturday night, there wasn't a lot of people hanging out outside, said Sergeant Nathan Odell of the Blacksburg Police. One of the things you'll see when it's cold is that between the peak hours, which are between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m., people aren't usually outside. That actually helps with the crime itself. In fact, in the city that year, there were only 12 arrests made on Halloween, but almost 100 calls received by dispatch. Of those, most were related to noise complaints or simply nervous people reporting on otherwise normal behavior. On the Virginia Tech campus, 6 arrests were made related to alcohol and drug offenses. However, it may be other events on campus that result in higher number of arrests and citations. For example, a football game occurring the same week as Halloween that year led to arrest numbers more than 6 times that than for the holiday. 39 taken into custody, and most for alcohol-related offenses. They take a different, friendlier approach to discouraging crime in the month of October in the Southern California town of Lompoc. This approach involves Halloween flocked flamingo lawn ornaments appearing in people's front yards, according to the Lompoc Record. Yes, that means birdie lawn ornaments decked out for Halloween. The event supports the Lompoc Valley Police Activities League, which provides programming for area youth, with the idea of helping them stay out of trouble. People can request an anonymous flocking at a charge of $25 or ask for removal for a small fee. They can also purchase insurance to protect them from a flocking. All raised money goes to Lompoc's Police Activities League organization, which was founded in 1998 and provides athletic, educational, and recreational activities to build bonds between teen and law enforcement officers. So, maybe it is the case that certain kinds of offenses are more frequent around Halloween, but it is also the case that our own fears and perceptions of danger increase around the spooky season. On Halloween night 2002, 21-year-old Chris Jenkins, a University of Minnesota student, went to celebrate the spookiest night of the year down at the Lone Tree Bar and Grill with his girlfriend, Ashley Rice, and 3 other friends. Shortly after midnight, Chris was separated from his friends and ejected from the bar. According to reports later given to police, a drink was accidentally spilled on his pants, and the security supervisor assumed that Chris was so intoxicated that he urinated himself. After Chris was removed, the security guard in question was given instructions not to let him back inside. Unfortunately for Chris, since his Native American Halloween costume had no pockets, he had asked Ashley to keep his wallet, keys, and cell phone in her purse for him, and his coat was left inside the bar on what turned out to be a chilly 20-degree night. Since he was not the designated driver, Chris was unable to get a ride home and could not contact his friends inside the bar. He was last seen headed away from the bar on foot, but did not return to his residence and was eventually reported missing. On February 27th the following year, Chris Jenkins' bloated, decaying corpse was found floating beneath a bridge on the Mississippi River. He was still dressed in his Halloween costume and had gotten wedged in the branches of a large tree located next to the upper St. Anthony Falls Dam. The medical examiner found no signs of foul play on Chris's body, so the official cause of death was listed as drowning. Despite the police ruling it a death by misadventure, his family launched their own independent investigation and discovered a number of odd discrepancies. The Jenkins family hired a private detective, Chuck Loesch, to further investigate their son's disappearance. When Loesch questioned staff at the Lone Tree Bar and Grill, they maintained that Chris left the bar on his own, and the venue's owner eventually issued a gag order instructing employees not to speak to anyone without an attorney. Loesch also contacted the Federal Reserve Bank, who happened to be the owners of the 2 CCTV cameras that had a good view of the Hennepin Avenue Bridge. The bridge was on the route that Jenkins was likeliest to have taken, but when the bank checked the surveillance footage from the earlier morning hours of November 1st, there was no sign of him. Loesch's investigation also led him to multiple witnesses who each independently recalled a fight that had occurred in front of a local pizza place. Though it was unclear if the victim was Chris, a gang of around 9 or 10 people had violently attacked another outside of the restaurant. Mike Casey, an off-duty police officer, was present in the area on the night of Jenkins' disappearance. He was moonlighting as a security guard for the nearby Hennepin Center for the Arts and was introduced to Jenkins by his girlfriend, Ashley Rice. Ashley happened to work at the Lone Tree Bar and Grill and was familiar with Casey, well enough that she had borrowed pieces of his uniform to complete her cliched sexy cop costume. There are rumors that Casey had in fact masterminded Jenkins' removal from the bar as a way to get to Ashley, given that he actually gave her a ride home later that night when her shift finished. The Minneapolis Police Department never formally questioned Casey, but stated that he's a married man with children. We don't want to break up a family. An incriminating statement, indeed. The Jenkins family went as far as hiring 2 separate groups of bloodhound trackers to trace Chris's scent from the Lone Tree Bar across the street to an underground parking garage. The scent trail led to parking stalls that one of the bar's bouncers was reportedly parked in on Halloween night. A bloodhound produced a mild hit for Chris's scent on this person's vehicle. Droplets of blood residue, a piece of red string, and red feather fragments which possibly belonged to the headband of Jenkins' costume were also found in the garage. Jenkins' blood alcohol was only 0.12%, so he could not have been particularly drunk, but coroners noted that traces of GHB were found in Chris's system. However, since GHB is a substance which is produced by the body naturally, this did not necessarily mean Chris was drugged. Forensic pathologist Dr. Michael Baden took issue with Jenkins' body being found with his arms crossed in front of him. Drowning victims who accidentally fall into water are almost always found face down with their arms outwards towards their sides and their clothing disheveled. Yet Jenkins' shirt was tucked into his drawstring pants and his oversized slip-on moccasins were still on his feet. This led to speculation that Chris was already dead when he was placed in the river. Hydrologists who studied the Mississippi River were highly skeptical that Chris's body could have been in the water for as long as 4 months without ever being seen, as the river did not freeze over until January 2003. What's more, the area beneath the 3rd Avenue Bridge was searched in the weeks following his disappearance, with no sign of him. A daytime thawing occurred on February 27th, the day Chris was found, so he possibly floated from another location before his body got wedged in the trees. Jenkins' family found it extremely unusual that there was no bruising on his body. Their son was an enthusiastic lacrosse player, a goalie in fact, who often came home from practice with huge purple and yellow patches on his legs and forearms. Since these bruises were not present, his parents believed he may have been alive for a couple of days after he went missing, allowing enough time for his bruises to heal. 3 years later, in 2006, the Jenkins family met with Minneapolis Police Chief Tim Dolan, who had decided to reopen the investigation based on the newly attained evidence. Chris's death was eventually reclassified as a homicide, and Chief Dolan held a press conference to issue a formal apology to the Jenkins family. Years later, Dolan would state that he estimated Jenkins' death was 50% chance of homicide, 30% chance of accidental death, and 20% chance of ending his own life. Once the case of Jenkins' death was reopened, an informant told authorities he had witnessed somebody throw Chris's body off the Hennepin Avenue Bridge into the Mississippi River. But there was skepticism about this story since Chris had no broken bones or injuries, and it would not have been possible to toss him over the bridge's high safety railing without his body hitting a steel support beam and vertical metal cables on the way down. In July 2007, the Hennepin County District Attorney's Office announced that they had been approached about filing charges against a suspect for Chris's murder, but declined to do so. The suspect in question was one Jeremy Alford, who was serving a life sentence for the brutal murder of a man by the name of Douglas Miller. Alford admitted to being a regular drinker down at the Lone Tree Bar and Grill around the time of 2002. Chris's case also had been connected to the infamous Smiley Face Killer, as his death took place around the same time that many college-aged men in the Midwest were discovered dead in bodies of water after a night of drinking. But unlike many of the other cited cases, no smiley face graffiti has ever been discovered in relation to Chris's death. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe and click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/letsreadofficial, and give and receive feedback from the community, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. and join my Discord to interact with me and other listeners directly. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon, and maybe even pick up some Let's Read merch on Spreadshirt. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all these stories in long compilation form and save huge on data, located on both Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Links in the bio. Thanks so much, friends, and remember, the candy man, he's got some tiny hands.